On September 9, 1965, a United States Navy A-4 Skyhawk aircraft was hit by anti-aircraft fire over North Vietnam and began to break apart at altitude. The pilot ejected. His parachute opened over a small village. By the time he reached the ground, the villagers had surrounded him. His shoulder had been shattered by the ejection. His knee had been broken in the landing. As he was being dragged through the crowd, he had one clear thought. He later recorded it in precise terms. He said to himself, "I am leaving the world of technology and entering the world of Epictetus." Not a prayer, not a survival calculation, a philosopher's name, a man who had been dead for 19 centuries. The pilot's name was James Bond Stockdale. He was a vice admiral in the United States Navy, a Medal of Honor recipient, and the senior American prisoner of war at the Hanoi Hilton, the North Vietnamese prison complex, for 7 years and 4 months. He was tortured repeatedly, placed in solitary confinement, denied medical treatment for injuries that left him permanently disabled, subjected to conditions that broke men with every other available psychological resource. He survived. And when he came home, he wrote one of the most important accounts of human endurance ever recorded, and he attributed his survival not to military training, not to physical toughness, and not to hope. He attributed it entirely to the philosophy of Epictetus. James Stockdale had encountered Epictetus years before his plane went down. He had studied philosophy at Stanford University under Philip Rhinelander, a course he later described as the most important education he ever received, more important than his naval training, more important than his combat experience. Rhinelander had introduced him to the Enchiridion, Epictetus's handbook. Stockdale read it. He read it again. He memorized significant portions of it. He described the experience in his memoir, Courage Under Fire, in precise terms. "I had been a military professional for 13 years. I was familiar with the literature of war, but I had never read anything that prepared me for what I was about to face the way Epictetus did. He did not know, in those years of study, that he would need to use it in those conditions. He simply recognized that the philosophy contained something true, something that applied to the structure of human experience at a level more fundamental than any specific circumstance." On September 9, 1965, that recognition was tested. The Hanoi Hilton Hoa Lo prison was not what its ironic nickname implied. It was a facility specifically designed to break American prisoners psychologically. The techniques used were not primarily physical. They were designed to target the prisoner's sense of identity, his connection to his values, his confidence in his own perception of reality, and his belief that his resistance served any purpose. The goal was not information by Stockdale's account. The North Vietnamese had little interest in the military intelligence prisoners could provide. The goal was a statement, a confession, a filmed capitulation that could be used for propaganda. A public breaking. They never got it from Stockdale. Not once. Across 7 years and 4 months, under conditions he documents in detail that remains difficult to read, they never produced what they were trying to produce. The question is why, and the answer is Epictetus. But Stockdale's survival was not simply a matter of personal toughness. He was not the only psychologically strong man in that prison. Many of the men held there were among the most capable individuals in the United States military. Some of them broke, not because they were weak, but because of how they thought about their situation. Stockdale identified the precise psychological error that caused men to break. He named it. He described its mechanism in clinical detail. And what he described maps exactly onto a distinction Epictetus had drawn in the 1st century AD. When the author Jim Collins interviewed Stockdale for his book Good to Great, he asked a direct question: who didn't make it out? Which prisoners did not survive? Stockdale's answer has become one of the most cited observations in the literature on human resilience. He said, "The optimists." Collins pressed him. He explained. "The optimists were the men who said, 'We'll be home by Christmas.' When Christmas came and passed, they revised, 'We'll be home by Easter.' Easter passed by Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving passed, they died of a broken heart," Stockdale said. They could not reconcile the gap between their expectation and their reality, and eventually the expectation killed them. This finding, now known as the Stockdale Paradox, has been confirmed repeatedly in the psychological literature on resilience. A landmark study by Martin Seligman and Christopher Peterson, examining POW survivors across multiple conflicts, found that the prisoners most likely to survive long-term captivity were not those with the highest levels of optimism. They were those with the highest levels of what Seligman called realistic flexibility, the capacity to accept the current situation without illusion while maintaining commitment to values and identity over time. The distinction is precise. It is not the same as pessimism. Stockdale was not pessimistic. He never doubted that he would eventually be released. What he refused was the specific form of optimism that attached his psychological stability to a timeline he could not control. He told Collins, "I never lost faith in the end of the story. I never doubted not only that I would get out, but also that I would prevail in the end and turn it into the defining event of my life. You must never confuse faith that you will prevail in the end, which you can never afford to lose, with the discipline to confront the most brutal facts of your current reality, whatever they might be. This is the Stoic dichotomy of control stated in the language of a man who tested it against the most extreme conditions of the 20th century. Faith in the ultimate outcome, the long-term commitment to values and identity, is inside the boundary. It belongs to the person, it cannot be taken. The specific timeline, the specific conditions, the specific day of release, these are outside the boundary. They belong to forces that do not consult the prisoner's preferences. Attaching psychological stability to them is the mechanism of the optimist's death. Epictetus had written from his own experience of captivity 19 centuries earlier, "Make the best use of what is in your power, and take the rest as it happens." Not as it should happen, as it happens. Stockdale had memorized those words. In the darkness of Hoa Lo prison, they were the difference between functioning and breaking. But Stockdale's application of Stoicism was not only internal. He was the senior officer. He was responsible for the survival of every American prisoner in that facility. And what he did, what he built inside Hoa Lo prison, using nothing but philosophical principles and the organizational capacity of a trained military mind, is one of the most extraordinary acts of leadership in the recorded history of any conflict. Stockdale established a covert communication system among the prisoners, a tap code transmitted through prison walls that allowed them to maintain coordinated resistance, share information, and sustain collective identity across solitary confinement cells that had been specifically designed to prevent exactly this. He established a set of behavioral standards for the prisoner community, what he called the back pressure system. When the North Vietnamese produced a prisoner who had capitulated on film, Stockdale ensured that the prisoner knew through the tap code that the community did not blame them, that the capitulation was understood and forgiven, and that they were expected to return to resistance at the earliest opportunity. He understood from Epictetus, from direct experience, that shame is one of the primary mechanisms of psychological destruction. A prisoner who believes that his community has lost faith in him because of a forced capitulation is a prisoner who has lost his most important resource. Stockdale refused to allow shame to operate as a weapon inside the prisoner community. He did this while being tortured himself, while in leg irons, while recovering from injuries that left him permanently disabled. He administered the psychological welfare of several hundred men while being systematically subjected to the conditions designed to prevent exactly that. In one of the most documented incidents of his imprisonment, Stockdale deliberately disfigured his own face with a razor when the North Vietnamese attempted to film him as a well-treated prisoner. He refused to be used. The physical cost of that refusal was severe. The psychological cost of compliance, to himself and to every prisoner who would have seen the footage, he judged to be greater. This is the Stoic calculus applied to the hardest possible conditions. What is inside the boundary? The choice of whether to be used, what is outside it. The consequences of refusing. He acted on what was his. He accepted what followed. Epictetus had written, "It is not death or pain that is to be dreaded, but the fear of pain or death." Stockdale had made the same calculation. The thing he feared, the loss of integrity, the use of his image to harm other prisoners, was more unbearable than the physical consequences of refusal. That ordering of priorities, maintained consistently across 7 years, is what the Stoics called virtue, and it is what survival in those conditions required. James Stockdale was released on February 12, 1973. He walked off the plane in San Diego with a leg that had been broken and improperly set, a shoulder that had been shattered, and a body that showed 7 years of what had been done to it. He was awarded the Medal of Honor, the United States military's highest decoration, for his conduct as a prisoner of war. The citation described his resistance as of the highest inspirational standard. He subsequently became president of the Naval War College, taught philosophy, and spent the rest of his life writing and lecturing about the intersection of Stoic philosophy and human resilience. He died in 2005 at the age of 81. In his memoir, he wrote this, "I never lost faith, but I also never lost the brutal honesty of where I actually was." Those two things together, faith in the outcome and honesty about the present, are what Epictetus gave me, and they are what I would give anyone facing anything difficult. The research on resilience across military, clinical, and organizational psychology consistently identifies the same two factors. Stockdale named committed values that do not depend on external conditions, and clear-eyed acceptance of current reality without denial. These are not personality traits, they are practiced disciplines. Epictetus practiced them in slavery. Marcus Aurelius practiced them during the plague and war. Seneca practiced them in exile. Stockdale practiced them in a North Vietnamese prison. The conditions are different. The mechanism is identical, and the mechanism is learnable. The specific difficulty you are currently facing is not a prison. The specific pressure you are under is not torture. The specific uncertainty in your life is not 7 years of unknown duration with no contact from the outside world, but the mechanism that determines how you move through difficulty. Any difficulty is the same mechanism that determined how Stockdale moved through the placement of psychological stability, inside the boundary or outside it, faith in the long-term outcome, brutal honesty about the present moment, full commitment to what is within reach, complete release of what is not. This is not inspiration. It is a documented protocol tested against the most extreme conditions modern warfare produced by a man who read it in a book and found that every word was true. The Stoic framework Stockdale used is available to every person in this video right now. The only question is whether it will be read in comfort and remain intellectual, or whether it will be practiced until it becomes structural. The Stoics knew which one mattered. Comments are open. Make sure to like the video and subscribe if it was beneficial. Next, amor fati, the Stoic concept that does not ask you to tolerate what happens to you. It asks something far more demanding than tolerance, and the reason it produces the most durable form of psychological freedom the ancient world ever documented.